Arthur Sterling looked at the woman sitting across the dinner table and felt nothing but contempt. She was wearing a dress she'd bought 5 years ago, her hands were rough from cleaning his house, and she looked out of place in the luxury he had built. He touched the inside pocket of his jacket, feeling the cold crispness of the divorce papers. He was ready to trade this peasant for a supermodel who matched his ambition. He had no idea that the woman he called plain was the runaway Grand Duchess of Valoria. He didn't know that the moment he signed those papers, he wasn't just losing a wife, he was declaring war on one of the most powerful royal families in Europe. And when the truth came out, it wouldn't be a quiet divorce. It would be a public execution of his ego. The penthouse apartment in Manhattan's Upper East Side was silent save for the rhythmic clinking of a silver spoon against a porcelain bowl. To anyone looking in from the outside, it was a scene of domestic perfection, a successful husband, a dutiful wife, and a view of the city skyline that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. But inside the room, the air was toxic. Arthur Sterling, a senior partner at Sterling & Finch Architecture, adjusted his silk tie, his eyes fixed on his phone. He didn't look at the woman sitting opposite him. He rarely did anymore. Emma sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She was beautiful in an understated way, with chestnut hair pulled back into a practical bun and eyes the color of old moss. But Arthur didn't see beauty. He saw mediocrity. He saw the fraying hem of her cardigan. He saw the lack of jewelry aside from the simple gold band on her finger. He saw a woman who refused to hire a maid because she liked to keep busy, a habit Arthur found embarrassingly plebeian. "Arthur," Emma said softly. Her voice was gentle, lacking the sharp, demanding edge of the women Arthur dealt with in the boardroom. "Did you like the pot roast I used, that recipe your mother used to make?" Arthur finally looked up, his lip curling slightly. "It's heavy, Emma, greasy. I have a meeting with the investors from Dubai tomorrow. I can't be bloated because my wife thinks we're living on a farm in Idaho." Emma flinched, but she didn't argue. She stood up and began clearing the plates. "I'm sorry. I'll make something lighter tomorrow. Maybe a salad." "Don't bother." Arthur stood up, checking his reflection in the hallway mirror. "I won't be home for dinner tomorrow, or the night after." "Oh." Emma paused, holding the stack of dirty dishes. "Is it the merger you've been working so late recently?" "Something like that," Arthur muttered. He wasn't working late. He was working on Isabella Thorne. Isabella was everything Emma was not. She was the daughter of a steel magnate, a woman who wore diamonds to breakfast and had a laugh that sounded like champagne bubbles popping. She was sharp, vicious, and undeniably expensive. When Arthur walked into a room with Isabella on his arm, men stared. When he walked in with Emma, they looked right through her. Arthur grabbed his briefcase. Inside lay the file he had picked up from his lawyer, James Caldwell, that morning. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The grounds were irreconcilable differences. But the real reason was simple. Arthur had outgrown her. He had found Emma 4 years ago in a library, a quiet, shy girl with no family, and a mysterious past she refused to discuss. Back then, Arthur was just a junior architect, stressed and lonely. Emma had been his sanctuary. She had supported him when he had nothing, nursed him through burnout, and celebrated his small wins with homemade cupcakes. But Arthur wasn't a junior architect anymore. He was a shark, and sharks didn't swim with goldfish. "Arthur!" Emma called out just as his hand touched the doorknob. He stopped, annoyed. "What is it?" "Happy anniversary," she whispered, reaching into her pocket and pulling out a small wrapped box. Arthur froze. He had forgotten. Completely. The realization didn't bring guilt. It brought irritation. It was just another shackle, another obligation. He stared at the box. He knew what was inside, a watch she'd saved up for a tie. It didn't matter. It was bought with the allowance he gave her. It was his money recycling back to him in the form of cheap sentiment. "I don't have time for this, Emma," Arthur said, cold opening the door. "Please." She stepped forward, her eyes pleading. "Just open it. It's important." He sighed, snatching the box and tearing the paper. Inside was not a watch nor a tie. It was an old, heavy iron key on a velvet cushion. It looked ancient, rusted, and utterly worthless. Arthur stared at it, baffled. A key. What is this? The key to the basement. It's a key to my home, Emma said, her voice trembling slightly. I wanted to tell you today about where I'm from, about who I really am. I think it's time you knew. Arthur laughed. It was a cruel barking sound. Who you are. You're Emma, the woman who clips coupons for detergent, even though I make 7 figures. You're the woman who embarrasses me at galas because you don't know which fork to use for the oysters. He threw the key back onto the hallway table. It landed with a heavy thud, chipping the wood. Keep your secrets, Emma. I don't care about your childhood home in whatever backwater town you crawled out of. I have a real future to build. He slammed the door, leaving her standing in the hallway. Emma looked at the rusted key. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the intricate crest engraved on the bow of the key, a crest of a 2-headed hawk gripping a sword. I tried, Arthur, she whispered to the empty room. I really tried to save you. Arthur's Mercedes S-Class tore through the rainy streets of Manhattan. The guilt of the anniversary moment lasted exactly 3 blocks before it was replaced by the anticipation of seeing Isabella. He arrived at the Gilded Lily, an exclusive members-only club in Soho. The maitre d' nodded deferentially as Arthur breezed past the line, heading straight for the VIP booth in the back. Isabella Thorne was waiting. She was wearing a dress made of red silk that looked like it had been poured over her body in liquid form. She held a martini glass with long, manicured fingers, her dark eyes tracking Arthur as he approached. You're late, she purred, not offering a cheek to kiss. I hate waiting, Arthur. It gives me wrinkles. I had to deal with domestic clutter, Arthur said, sliding into the booth. He signaled the waiter for a Scotch neat. Isabella laughed, a sharp sound. She made you a casserole again, didn't she, poor Arthur? Living with a mouse. The mouse is on her way out, Arthur said, tapping the breast pocket of his jacket. I have the papers. I'm going to serve her this weekend. Isabella's eyes lit up. This weekend at the company gala? Arthur hesitated. I was thinking of doing it quietly on Sunday. The gala is public. That's the point, darling. Isabella leaned forward, placing a hand on his knee. Think about it. The board of directors will be there. The investors. If you show up with that frumpy little thing, you look weak. You look like a man who settles. But if you show you're cutting the dead weight to focus on the empire, they'll respect you. She swirled her olive in the glass. Besides, I'll be there. My father is attending. He's looking for a new lead architect for the Skyline project. He likes men who are decisive. Men who upgrade. The Skyline project. It was a $2 billion contract. It would cement Arthur's legacy. You really think your father would give it to me? If you're with me. Isabella smiled, her teeth white and predatory. He won't have a choice. But not if you're still tethered to the maid. Arthur visualized it, walking into the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, the flashbulbs, serving Emma the papers, effectively banishing her from his world, and then stepping onto the dance floor with Isabella Thorne. It was cruel. It was heartless. It was necessary. Fine, Arthur said, downing his scotch in one burn. I'll do it at the gala, before the speeches. Isabella clinked her glass against his empty one. To the future, Mr. Sterling, and to upgrading. Meanwhile, back at the penthouse, Emma was on the phone. She wasn't speaking English. She was speaking a dialect of French mixed with something older, a language spoken only in the high courts of Valoria. He refused the key, Lucas, she said into the receiver, her voice steady but cold. On the other end of the line, Lucas Darrow, the head of the Royal Security Detail for the House of Valoria, paused. He refused the key of Ethelgard. Your Highness, that key is worth more than the building he lives in. He doesn't know, Emma said, looking out at the rain. He thinks I'm nobody. Your Highness, Lucas's voice deepened. The Regency Council is growing impatient. Your brother's coronation is in 3 days. You must return, if Mr. Sterling is not willing to stand by you as the prince consort." "He isn't—" Emma cut him off. "He has made his choice. I see that now. For 4 years I wanted to be loved for me, Lucas. Not for the crown, not for the treasury, not for the title. Just Emma. But it seems Emma isn't enough for him." "What are your orders, ma'am?" Emma walked to the window. She saw her reflection. She didn't look like a downtrodden housewife anymore. Her posture straightened, the chin lifted. The eyes that Arthur called mossy suddenly looked like hard emeralds. "He wants to end it," Emma said. "He's planning something for the company gala on Saturday. I can see it in his eyes. He wants to discard me publicly." "We can extract you tonight," Lucas offered. "We can have a jet ready at Teterboro in an hour. You never have to see him again." "No," Emma said softly. A dangerous smile touched her lips, a smile that had belonged to her grandmother, the Iron Queen. "If he wants a show, Lucas, let's give him a show. Prepare the entourage. Bring the Royal Guard. And bring the Rolls Royces. All of them." "Ma'am," Lucas sounded stunned. "You want to reveal yourself in New York." "He called me a peasant, Lucas," Emma whispered. "I think it's time Arthur Sterling learned the difference between a peasant and a queen." "As you wish, Your Highness. We will be ready." Emma hung up the phone. She walked to the closet and pushed aside the drab gray wool coats Arthur preferred her to wear. Deep in the back, hidden inside a garment bag she hadn't opened in 4 years, was a dress. It wasn't gray. It was a deep royal midnight blue embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like stardust. She ran her hand over the fabric. Arthur wanted a divorce. He was going to get one. But first he was going to get a history lesson. Saturday night arrived with the humidity of a storm waiting to break. The Plaza Hotel was glowing a beacon of wealth in the center of Manhattan. Limousines lined up like shiny black beetles, depositing men in tuxedos and women in gowns that cost more than small cars. Arthur stood near the entrance of the grand ballroom, checking his watch. He looked impeccable in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, but his palms were sweating. "Relax," Isabella whispered, appearing at his side. She was wearing gold tonight, a metallic shimmering gown that clung to her curves. She looked like a trophy. "Is the mouse here?" "She's coming separately," Arthur muttered. "I told her I had to arrive early for a board meeting. I didn't want to ride in the Uber with her." "Uber?" Isabella laughed. "Classy." "She refused to let me hire a car, said it was a waste of money." Arthur rolled his eyes. Just then the murmurs started. Arthur assumed the noise was for a celebrity, maybe a movie star or a politician. He turned toward the grand staircase, expecting to see his boss, or perhaps Isabella's father. Instead, he saw Emma. But it wasn't the Emma he knew. She was walking down the marble stairs alone. She wore a simple, off-the-rack gray dress that was slightly too loose. Her hair was in its usual bun. She wore no makeup. Amidst the sea of diamonds, silk, and Botox, she looked painfully, excruciatingly ordinary. The murmurs weren't of awe. They were of pity. "Oh, God!" Arthur hissed, closing his eyes. "Look at her. She looks like the help." "Perfect," Isabella whispered, her eyes gleaming. "She's embarrassing you just by existing. Do it now, Arthur, before dinner is served." Arthur took a deep breath. He grabbed a glass of champagne to steady his nerves and marched toward the bottom of the stairs to intercept her. Emma reached the bottom step. She looked around the room, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Arthur. She offered him a small, tentative smile. "Arthur," she said, her voice barely audible over the jazz band, "I made it." "You made it all right." Arthur snapped, grabbing her elbow and steering her away from the main crowd, but not far enough to be private. He wanted witnesses. He wanted Isabella to see. "Emma, look at you. You're a mess." I dressed up," Emma stammered, looking down at her dress. "I ironed it." "It's not about the ironing, Emma. It's about fitting in." Arthur raised his voice. Several heads turned. "You don't fit in. You never have. You're an anchor around my neck." Emma went still. "Arthur people are watching." "Let them watch," Arthur declared, fueled by the adrenaline and the alcohol. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the envelope. "I'm done, Emma. I'm done pretending that this marriage works. I'm done pretending that you are enough for me." He shoved the envelope against her chest. She had to grab it to keep it from falling. "What is this?" she asked, though her eyes remained dry. "Divorce papers," Arthur stated loudly. "I want you out of the apartment by Monday. I'll give you a settlement enough to get you back to whatever trailer park you came from. But we are finished." The room had gone quiet. The jazz band had stopped playing. The elite of New York were watching the public evisceration of a wife by her husband. Isabella sauntered up, linking her arm through Arthur's. She looked at Emma with a sneer. "Take the money, honey. Buy yourself some new shoes. God knows you need them." Emma looked from the papers to Arthur, then to Isabella. "Is this what you want, Arthur?" Emma asked, her voice suddenly devoid of the trembling weakness he was used to. It was clear, resonant, and strangely commanding. "You wish to dissolve our union." "Yes." Arthur scoffed. "Look at you. Look at me. We are different species, Emma." Emma slowly tapped the envelope against her palm. "You are right, Arthur. We are different species." She looked past him toward the massive double doors of the ballroom entrance. "Lucas," she said. She didn't shout. She just spoke the name into the air. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the ballroom burst open with a resounding crash. Arthur jumped. The entire room turned. Marching into the room were 12 men. They were not hotel security. They were not police. They were 6'4" giants wearing formal military dress uniforms, deep blue tunics with gold braiding red sashes, and ceremonial sabers at their hips. They moved in perfect synchronization, their boots thudding against the marble floor like thunder. "What is this?" Arthur demanded. "Who are these clowns?" The soldiers didn't look at him. They marched straight through the crowd, splitting the sea of socialites like the Red Sea. They formed a protective semicircle around Emma, their backs to her, facing the crowd with stony expressions. Then a man in a pristine tuxedo entered behind them. It was Lucas Darrow, though Arthur didn't know him. Lucas walked up to Emma, ignored Arthur entirely, and bowed a deep, waist-bending bow that lasted for 3 full seconds. "Your Imperial Highness," Lucas said, his voice carrying through the silent ballroom, "the royal jet is fueled at JFK. The King of Spain sends his regards, and your brother the Crown Prince awaits your arrival in Valoria." Arthur froze. He felt like the floor was tilting. "Highness," he whispered. Lucas straightened up and snapped his fingers. 2 of the guards stepped forward, holding a long velvet cape trimmed with white ermine fur, the symbol of royalty. They draped it over Emma's shoulders, covering the cheap gray dress. Emma adjusted the heavy cloak. She looked at Arthur. The shy, mousy housewife was gone. In her place stood a woman who carried the weight of 1,000 years of history. "You called me a peasant, Arthur," Emma said, her voice cold as ice. "But in my country we do not serve divorce papers at parties. We execute traitors." Arthur's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Isabella looked at Emma, then at the guards, her face draining of color. This is a joke, right? She's an orphan. I am Princess Eleanor Sophia Valerius of Ethelgard," Emma announced, her eyes boring into Isabella. "Third in line to the throne of Valoria, Duchess of the Western Isles. And you," she looked at Arthur, who was trembling, "you are just a man who made a very expensive mistake." The silence in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was heavy, a physical weight that pressed down on the lungs of every guest. Moments ago the air had been filled with the clinking of crystal and the hum of gossip. Now the only sound was the sharp click-clack of a news camera shutter somewhere in the back, capturing the moment Arthur Sterling's life began to disintegrate. Arthur stood frozen. his hand still extended in the air where he had gestured to the divorce papers. He looked at the woman he had known as Emma, the woman who clipped coupons, the woman who darned his socks, the woman who smelled of vanilla and patience. He looked at the ermine cloak draped over her shoulders. He looked at the 12 royal guards, their hands resting ominously on the hilts of their sabers. "This is ridiculous." Arthur stammered, his laugh sounding brittle and manic. He turned to the crowd, spreading his arms. "Everyone, please. This is a prank. Emma has a flair for the dramatic. She hired actors. It's pathetic, really." He reached out to grab Emma's arm to pull her off her pedestal and drag her back down to his reality. "Stop this charade, Emma. You're making a fool of Clang." Before his fingers could graze the fabric of her dress, a gloved hand shot out. Lucas Darrow moved with a speed that blurred the eye. In one fluid motion, he intercepted Arthur's wrist and twisted it. Arthur yelped, dropping to one knee. The pain was sharp and shocking. "Do not touch Her Highness," Lucas said, his voice low and dangerous like a growl from a dark cave. Touching a member of the royal house without permission is an act of aggression. In Valoria, the penalty is the loss of the hand. Lucas released him with a shove. Arthur stumbled back, clutching his wrist, his face red with humiliation and rage. Isabella Thorne stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't afraid of actors, and she was too arrogant to believe the truth yet. "Oh, stop it!" she spat, looking at Emma. "You expect us to believe you're a princess, you. I saw you buying discount ground beef at the bodega last week. Royalty doesn't do its own grocery shopping." Emma looked down at Isabella. The height difference was only a few inches, but in that moment, Emma seemed to tower over her like a skyscraper. "Royalty does what is necessary to survive when hiding from political insurgents," Emma said calmly. "I lived in shadows to protect my family. I lived simply because I wanted to understand the life of the man I loved. I wanted to know if you loved me, Arthur, or if you just loved the idea of a wife." She took a step closer to Arthur, the velvet cloak swishing softly. "I cooked your meals," she said, her voice echoing. "I cleaned your home. I supported your dreams. I saved every penny of the allowance you gave me to buy you an anniversary gift. I was a wife, Arthur, a real wife, and you—" She gestured to Isabella, who was looking increasingly uncertain as she noticed the specific crest on the guards' uniforms, the double-headed hawk. Isabella's father, the steel magnate, had gone pale in the background. He recognized that crest. It was the crest of the family that owned the largest iron mines in Europe. "You traded a kingdom for a trinket," Emma finished. She reached into the pocket of her gray dress, the dress Arthur had mocked. She pulled out the heavy iron key he had rejected the night before. "You laughed at this," she said, holding it up. "You asked if it was the key to a basement." She dropped the key. It hit the marble floor with a heavy ringing sound that seemed to signal the end of an era. "It is the key to the summer palace in Ethelgard," she whispered. "It opens a vault containing the Star of Valoria diamond. It opens a door to a life you could never buy, no matter how many skyscrapers you build." And you threw it on the table. Arthur stared at the key. His greed flared a sudden desperate hunger. A palace. A diamond. "Emma!" he croaked, taking a step forward, his tone shifting from anger to a slimy desperation. "Baby, wait. Let's talk about this. If this is true, why didn't you tell me we're a team? We can work this out. I was just stressed. The papers, they were just a wake-up call. I didn't mean it." The crowd gasped. The shamelessness was breathtaking. Emma looked at him, and for the first time in 4 years her eyes held absolutely no warmth. "The papers are served, Arthur," she said. "You wanted a divorce. You shall have it." She turned on her heel. "Commander Darrow, we are leaving." "Make way," Lucas barked. The guards snapped to attention and began to march. The crowd parted instantly. Emma walked through the corridor of people head high, the ermine cloak trailing behind her like a royal train. She didn't look back, not once. Arthur was left standing in the center of the ballroom, clutching his bruised wrist, the divorce papers lying scattered on the floor around his feet like trash. Isabella stared at him, then at the retreating figure of the princess. She saw the way the other guests were looking at Arthur with disgust, with mockery. She saw her father, Marcus Thorne, shaking his head and turning his back on Arthur. "You idiot!" Isabella hissed, pulling her arm away as Arthur tried to reach for her. "Isabella, wait!" "Don't touch me!" she snapped. "You didn't just dump a wife, Arthur. You declared war on a diplomatic superpower. I'm not sinking with this ship." She walked away, her gold dress shimmering, leaving Arthur completely, utterly alone in a room full of people. The hangover Arthur Sterling woke up to the next morning wasn't from alcohol, it was from reality. He sat up in his bed in the penthouse, the silence of the apartment deafening. Usually on a Sunday morning there would be the smell of coffee and bacon. Emma would be humming in the kitchen. Today the air smelled stale. The kitchen was cold. Arthur grabbed his phone from the nightstand. He expected a few texts, maybe an angry voicemail from his lawyer. What he found was an avalanche. 47 missed calls, 120 new emails. Trending on Twitter, the Prince of Fools. Arthur opened Twitter with trembling fingers. The video from the gala was everywhere. Someone had live-streamed the entire confrontation. It had 15 million views in 8 hours. The comments were brutal. "Duh, city girl. Imagine divorcing a literal princess for a plastic mistress. Fumbled the bag." At Royal Watchdog. "That's Princess Eleanor. She's been missing for years. The King of Valoria is going to nuke this guy's career." At Architect Daily. Sterling and Finch stock plummets 12% in pre-market trading. Arthur threw the phone across the bed. "No," he muttered. "No, this will blow over. It's just gossip." He showered quickly, dressed in his best suit, and headed to the office. He needed to do damage control. He needed to secure the Skyline project. If he signed the deal with Isabella's father today, the money would make the scandal irrelevant. Money always cleaned up messes. He walked into the lobby of Sterling and Finch. Usually the receptionist, Sarah, would greet him with a bright smile. Today she didn't look up. She was pretending to type furiously. "Sarah," Arthur said, trying to project confidence. "Get Marcus Thorne on the line. Tell him I'm reviewing the contracts and I'll be over at noon." Sarah finally looked up. Her expression was a mix of pity and fear. "Mr. Sterling, Mr. Thorne called an hour ago, and he canceled the meeting and the contract." Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. "He can't do that. We have a verbal agreement." He sent a formal letter. Sarah handed him a thick envelope. He said he cannot have his family name associated with a man who lacks strategic vision and basic character. Also what?" Arthur snapped. "Also, the Valorian Sovereign Wealth Fund owns a 15% controlling stake in Thorne Steel. They threatened to pull their liquidity if Mr. Thorne did business with you." Arthur staggered back against the reception desk. The Valorian Wealth Fund. Emma's family. "They're blocking me," he whispered. "She's blocking me." "It gets worse, sir," Sarah said softly. "The partners are waiting for you in the boardroom. All of them." Arthur walked to the boardroom like a man walking to the gallows. He pushed open the glass doors. Sitting around the long mahogany table were the 5 other senior partners of the firm. At the head of the table sat Cyrus Finch, the founder. Cyrus was 70 years old, a man who loved architecture and hated scandal. "Sit down, Arthur," Cyrus said without looking up from his iPad. "Cyrus, listen." Arthur began buttoning his jacket. "The media is blowing this out of proportion. It's a personal matter. It won't affect my work." "It has already affected your work," Cyrus said, sliding the iPad across the table. On the screen was a press release from the Royal Palace of Valoria. Official decree. The Crown formally ceases all operations, investments, and future developments in the United States that utilize the services of Sterling and Finch Architecture, effective immediately, pending an investigation into the mistreatment of Her Royal Highness Princess Eleanor. That represents 40% of our international portfolio, Cyrus said quietly. Hotels in Dubai, the museum in London, the resort in Monaco, they all have Valorian backing. They all pulled out this morning. Cyrus took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. You cost us $300 million in 4 hours, Arthur. I can fix it. Arthur slammed his hand on the table. I'll talk to her. She loves me. She's just hurting. I'll fly to Valoria. I'll apologize. You can't fly anywhere, said a voice from the corner of the room. Arthur turned. Standing there was a man in a sharp gray suit holding a briefcase. It was James Caldwell, Arthur's own lawyer, but James wasn't looking at Arthur with the usual camaraderie. James, Arthur asked, what are you doing here? I'm not representing you anymore, Arthur, James said, stepping forward. I've been retained by the firm to handle your exit package. Exit? Arthur laughed incredulously. I'm a senior partner. My name is on the door. There is a morality clause in your partnership agreement, Cyrus said. Section 4, Paragraph B, conduct bringing disrepute to the firm. Disrepute, Arthur shouted. I got a divorce. Half the country gets divorced. You tried to publicly humiliate a foreign dignitary at a company gala, Cyrus corrected. You didn't just get divorced, Arthur. You committed social suicide on a global stage. The board has voted unanimously. You're out. You can't do this, Arthur hissed. I built this firm's modern aesthetic, and you destroyed its reputation. Cyrus stood up. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal effects. Leave your company phone and laptop. Arthur stood stunned. In 24 hours he had lost his wife, his mistress, his biggest client, and his job. He stormed out of the boardroom, ignoring the stares of the junior associates. He went to his office, the corner office with the view he loved so much. He grabbed a box and started throwing things into it. His award for Architect of the Year, a framed photo of himself shaking hands with the mayor. Then he saw it. Tucked in the corner of his desk under a stack of blueprints was a small framed photo of Emma. It was from their first year together. She was laughing, eating ice cream on a park bench. She looked happy. She looked adoring. Arthur stared at the photo. Rage bubbled up in his chest. You planned this, he muttered at the photo. You set me up. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a personal number. He answered it. What? Mr. Sterling. The voice was crisp, British, and unfamiliar. This is Alistair Thorne, Chief Legal Counsel for the Royal House of Valoria. Arthur froze. I want to speak to my wife. Her Highness is currently en route to the capital, the lawyer replied calmly. I am calling to inform you regarding the status of the divorce petition you served yesterday. I withdraw it, Arthur said quickly. I withdraw the petition. We're not divorced. I want to reconcile. I'm afraid that is not possible, Mr. Sterling. Her Highness has countersigned the papers. However, the lawyer paused. There is the matter of the prenuptial agreement. We didn't have a prenup, Arthur shouted. She had nothing when I met her. I had all the assets. Correction, the lawyer said. You thought she had nothing. But under international royal law, which supersedes your state marriage license due to her diplomatic status, any union with a royal heir requires a consolidation of assets unless otherwise specified. Since you insisted on no prenup because you thought she was poor, you inadvertently agreed to a 50-50 split of marital assets under the Valorian Royal Charter of 1750. Arthur blinked. So, she has billions. If we split 50-50, I get half of her fortune. The lawyer chuckled softly. It was a dry, terrifying sound. Oh, Mr. Sterling, you misunderstand. The royal treasury is state property. It is not a marital asset. Her Highness's personal wealth is in a trust you cannot touch. However, your assets, your penthouse, your investment accounts, your offshore holdings were acquired during the marriage. Under Valorian law, she is entitled to half of your estate." Arthur felt his knees give way. He sank into his office chair. "She doesn't need my money," Arthur whispered. "She's rich." "It's not about the money, Mr. Sterling," the lawyer said, his voice icy. "Her Highness instructed me to tell you that she intends to donate her share of your wealth to the New York Shelter for Displaced Women. She feels it is poetic. She wants to ensure that no woman ever has to stay with a man like you simply because she cannot afford to leave." "She's taking my house," Arthur gasped. "She is taking half the value of the house. Since you likely do not have the liquid cash to pay her out, yes. The penthouse will be listed for sale on Monday." "This is vindictive," Arthur screamed. "No, Mr. Sterling," the lawyer replied before hanging up. "This is justice." Arthur dropped the phone. He looked around his office, the office he was being kicked out of. He thought of his penthouse, the home he was about to lose. He had wanted to upgrade. He had wanted more. Now he realized with a sinking, nauseating clarity he had been sleeping next to a winning lottery ticket for 4 years, and he had used it as a coaster. But Arthur Sterling was not a man who gave up. He was a shark, and sharks kept moving. He looked at the TV screen in the lobby across the hall. It was showing live footage of a private Boeing 747 landing at an airfield in Europe. Red carpets were being rolled out. Crowds were cheering. "Princess returns home." The headline read. Arthur's eyes narrowed. "She still loves me," he whispered to himself, a delusion taking root in his panicked mind. "She cried when I forgot the anniversary. She kept her identity secret to protect me. She's doing this to punish me, but she still wants me." He grabbed his passport from his desk drawer. "I'm going to Valoria," he said, shoving the passport into his pocket. "I'm going to get my wife back, and I'm going to get my share of that crown." He didn't know it yet, but he wasn't flying toward a reconciliation. He was flying toward the lion's den. And the lions were hungry. The flight to Valoria was the longest of Arthur Sterling's life. He had liquidated his 401k to purchase a last-minute business-class ticket, convinced that this was an investment. He spent the 7 hours rehearsing his speech. He would play the victim. He would claim he was overwhelmed by work, that Isabella was a momentary lapse of judgment caused by stress, and that his love for Emma was the only true thing in his life. He landed at Valoria International Airport, expecting a chaotic scene paparazzi, maybe a royal escort if they knew he was coming. Instead, he found silence. As he stepped off the plane, 2 men in dark suits were waiting at the end of the jet bridge. They weren't smiling. "Mr. Sterling," one of them said. It wasn't a question. "Please come with us." Finally, Arthur straightened his tie, assuming they were palace staff. "Take me to my wife. We have much to discuss." "We are taking you to the holding facility," the agent replied dryly. "Holding facility." Arthur balked. "I am the husband of the princess. I demand to be taken to the palace." "You are a foreign national with no visa," the agent said, grabbing Arthur's arm with a grip like a vice. "And you are currently flagged as a security risk to the crown." Arthur was not driven in a Rolls-Royce. He was thrown into the back of an armored van with barred windows. They drove for an hour, winding up the steep, jagged cliffs that protected the capital city of Ethelgard. When the van finally stopped, Arthur looked out. They weren't at a police station. They were at the gates of the Citadel of the Hawks, a fortress that had stood for 800 years. It was massive, imposing, and terrifying. Arthur was marched through stone corridors that smelled of damp earth and old iron. He was shoved into a room with a single wooden table and 2 chairs. He waited for 3 hours. No water, no phone, just the sound of his own heart hammering against his ribs. Finally, the heavy oak door creaked open. Arthur jumped up, putting on his best charming smile. "Emma! Thank God I—" The smile died on his face. It wasn't Emma. A man walked in. He was a giant standing 6'6" with shoulders that filled the doorway. He had a scar running down his left cheek and eyes that burned with a cold blue intensity. He wore a military uniform adorned with enough medals to sink a ship. This was Crown Prince Stefan Valerius, the Lion of Valoria, Emma's older brother. Stefan didn't speak. He walked to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. He placed a single folder on the table. "Sit," Stefan said. His voice was deep, vibrating in Arthur's chest. Arthur sat, his confidence evaporating. "Your Highness, I assume I'm here to see Emma. I'm her husband." "You are a biological error," Stefan said calmly. "But yes, legally, you are her husband, for now. Look, I know how it looks." Arthur began, his hands sweating. "But the media has twisted everything. I love your sister. I made a mistake. I'm here to fix it." Stefan looked at Arthur with genuine curiosity, as if observing a new species of insect. "You do not love my sister, Mr. Sterling. You loved a maid. You loved a cook. You loved a woman who made you feel big because you thought she was small." Stefan opened the folder. "We have done a deep dive into your financials, Arthur. You are leveraging your assets. You are in debt. You came here not for love, but because you realized you threw away a winning lottery ticket." "That's not true," Arthur lied, his voice cracking. "It does not matter." Stefan leaned forward. "My sister is preparing for the coronation gala. She does not wish to see you." "I have rights." Arthur snapped, his desperation turning to anger. "I am her husband. I want to see her. If you don't let me see her, I'll go to the press. I'll tell them. I'll tell them she's mentally unstable. I'll tell them she tricked me." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Stefan slowly stood up. He walked around the table until he was standing directly behind Arthur. He leaned down, whispering into Arthur's ear. "You threatened the House of Valoria," Stefan whispered. "Do you know why my sister hid in New York? Arthur, do you know why she pretended to be poor?" Arthur shook his head, terrified. "Because 5 years ago, insurgents tried to kidnap her. She fled to protect herself. She wanted a simple life. She wanted to be safe. And you?" Stefan's hand rested heavily on Arthur's shoulder. "You made her feel worthless, which is a crime far worse than kidnapping." The door opened again. "He is ready," Stefan said to the guards. "Ready for what?" Arthur asked, panic rising. "Deportation." "No." Stefan smiled, a cruel, sharp expression. "You wanted to see the princess. You wanted to be part of the royal world. Very well. We will grant your wish. You are invited to the royal court." Arthur was dragged up. "Wait, really?" "Oh, yes," Stefan said. "But be warned, Arthur. The view from the top is dizzying." Arthur was not given a chance to shower or shave. He was marched out of the holding cell through a labyrinth of corridors, and suddenly he was thrust into blinding light. He was in the throne room. It was a cavernous hall dripping with gold and velvet. Chandeliers the size of cars hung from the ceiling, and the room was full. Hundreds of nobles, diplomats, and generals stood in silence, forming a long aisle leading to the dais. Arthur stood there in his rumpled suit, smelling of sweat and fear, while men in tuxedos and women in tiaras stared at him with open disdain. "Walk!" a guard shoved him. Arthur stumbled forward. His footsteps echoed on the marble floor. It was the longest walk of his life. At the end of the hall, on a raised platform, sat 3 thrones. On the left sat Prince Stefan, who had taken a shortcut to arrive before Arthur. On the right sat an elderly woman with hair like steel wool, the Queen Grandmother. And in the center sat Emma. She was unrecognizable. The woman who used to wear clearance rack cardigans was gone. She wore a gown of deep emerald velvet that matched her eyes. On her head sat the coronet of Ethelgard, a heavy platinum band encrusted with diamonds. She didn't slouch. She didn't look down. She looked like a statue of a goddess carved from ice. Arthur reached the foot of the dais. He looked up at her. "Emma," he whispered. She didn't blink. "You are in the presence of Her Royal Highness," a herald announced. "Kneel." Arthur hesitated. He had never kneeled for anyone, but the sheer weight of the room forced him down. He dropped to one knee. "You came a long way, Arthur," Emma said. Her voice was amplified by the acoustics of the room. It sounded powerful. "Why?" "To bring you home," Arthur said, trying to project his voice. "To bring us home. New York is our home, Emma. We can forget all this. We can go back to how it was." "How it was?" Emma asked, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "You mean me waiting for you to come home while you slept with Isabella Thorne? Me cleaning your floors while you checked your bank account?" "I made a mistake," Arthur shouted, standing up. The guards tensed, but Emma raised a hand to stop them. "I'm human, Emma. I built a life for us. I paid for everything." "You paid for nothing," Emma said softly. She gestured to a servant who stepped forward holding a silver tray. On the tray was a thick ledger. "This," Emma said, "is a record of my personal trust fund withdrawals over the last 4 years. Do you know where the money went, Arthur?" Arthur stared at the book. "What?" "Sterling and Finch was going bankrupt 4 years ago," Emma revealed. "You lost the Midtown contract. You were going to lose the firm. Then suddenly an anonymous angel investor from Europe injected $2 million to save you. Do you remember?" Arthur's mouth fell open. That was you." "And the mortgage on the penthouse," Emma continued. "The bank was about to foreclose. Another anonymous payment cleared the debt. That was me." A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. "I didn't want you to feel small," Emma said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "I knew your ego was fragile, so I saved you from the shadows. I let you believe you were the provider. I let you believe you were the king of your little castle, while I paid for the bricks." Arthur felt like he had been punched in the gut. All his arrogance, all his pride about being a self-made man, it was a lie. He had been subsidized by the wife he called poor. I didn't know," Arthur whispered. "Because you never asked," Emma said. "You never looked at me long enough to see anything other than a reflection of yourself." She stood up. The room went deathly silent. "Arthur Sterling, you came here for a settlement. You shall have one." She motioned to the royal lawyer Alistair Thorne, who stepped forward with a document. "This is a decree of annulment," Emma stated. "It declares that our marriage was based on your fraud. It strips you of any claim to royal assets." "But the house," Arthur stammered. "My firm. The money I invested in your firm is now classified as a sovereign debt," Emma said coldly. "Since you cannot repay the $2 million plus interest, the Crown of Valoria is seizing Sterling and Finch assets to recoup the loss." Arthur's eyes bulged. "You're taking my company." "I am taking my company," she corrected. "As for the penthouse, I have donated the deed to the charity I mentioned. You have 30 days to vacate." Arthur looked around the room. He saw no sympathy, only judgment. "You can't do this to me," he sobbed, falling back to his knees. "I'm your husband. I loved you. You loved the idea of owning things," Emma said, looking down at him with finality. "And now you own nothing." She reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out the rusted iron key, the anniversary gift. "This key," she said, holding it up. "You asked if it opened the basement. It opens the gate to the royal gardens where I used to play as a child. It was an invitation to my heart, Arthur. It was the only thing I had that was truly mine to give." She dropped the key. It clattered onto the marble floor, landing just out of his reach. "Guard," Emma said, turning away. "Remove this stranger from my sight." "Emma, no, please!" Arthur screamed as 2 guards hauled him up by his armpits. "Isabella, I left her for you. I have no one." "Then you are finally free," Emma said without looking back. As they dragged him toward the heavy doors, Arthur saw one last thing. He saw Prince Stefan lean over and whisper something to Emma. She threw her head back and laughed a free, bright, beautiful laugh that Arthur had never heard in 4 years of marriage. The doors slammed shut. 6 months later, Arthur Sterling sat in a small, cramped studio apartment in Queens. The heating was broken and he was wearing a sweater with a hole in the sleeve. He scrolled through his phone looking for job listings. No architecture firm in the city would hire him. The scandal had been too big, the humiliation too absolute. He was currently working as a shift manager at a hardware store. A notification popped up on his screen. A news alert. Live, the royal wedding of Princess Eleanor of Valoria. Arthur's finger hovered over the link. He knew he shouldn't watch. It would only kill him. But he couldn't help it. He tapped the screen. The video showed a cathedral filled with light. He saw Emma walking down the aisle. She looked radiant, happier than he had ever seen her. Waiting for her at the altar was a duke from Spain, a man who looked at her not with contempt, but with adoration. Arthur watched as they exchanged vows. He watched the crowd cheer. Then the camera panned to the crowd. For a split second, he saw a face he recognized. It was Isabella Thorne. She was working as a waitress at the reception, holding a tray of champagne glasses, looking miserable and aged. Her father had cut her off after the scandal destroyed his deal. She, too, had paid the price. Arthur turned off the phone. He stared at the blank screen, seeing his own reflection. A man who had everything held it in his hands and threw it away because he thought the packaging wasn't shiny enough. He looked at his dinner, a microwave meal on a paper plate. "Happy anniversary, Arthur," he whispered to the empty room. And that is the tragic, satisfying downfall of Arthur Sterling. He learned the hard way that when you marry a woman, you should treat her like a queen because you never know she might actually be one. What do you think? Was Emma's punishment too harsh? Or did Arthur get exactly what he deserved? And what about the twist with the angel investor money? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and royal justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have a crazy tale coming up next week about a lottery winner who hid his ticket in a place you'll never guess. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.